Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Resolution Foundation, we're a policy and research organisation. We work on people on low to middle income. So for a couple, let's say, with no children, that's between about 12 and 30,000. And you won't be surprised to know that housing, aside from wages, is probably the biggest issue that they raise with us when we talk to them. And just to give you a snapshot of one of these kinds of families that we're talking about, Karen and Darren are a couple with 4 kids that we are following over the course of this year. They live in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. They are a typical sort of family in the private rented sector who are unable to own and never will be able to own unless their circumstances change dramatically, because at the end of the month they've spent all the money that comes in. They really don't save very much at all, and so their hope of ever accumulating a deposit is sort of waning. Now that they're already both in their mid-30s, they can't really ever see a time when they're going to earn substantially more and be able to own. And I think that is the cultural shift that we're seeing in Britain. For the first time ever, more people are renting than owning. And so what we're seeing is not, as people have already said, renting no longer being the phase that you go through in maybe your early 20s before you accumulate enough money to buy a house. It's more and more going to be a long-term option for people. And just to give you a statistic from some research that we did recently and published about a month ago, if we assume that people save about 5% of their income every year, which is actually quite ambitious, a lot of people don't save anything, it would now take the average low to middle income household 31 years to accumulate a deposit for the average first home. And that pretty much, I think, to most people spells never. So really, you're never really going to get there. And what we know is that in 2008, sort of before the recession really hit, 30% of people in that kind of income bracket were buying with 100% mortgages. So people were able to get on the housing ladder, but only because they were sort of borrowing themselves to the hilt. And those products have now gone. So really we are seeing a group of people for whom long-term renting is going to be the future. And I think with that in mind, echoing some of the things that Caroline's already said, I just don't think a lot of the sector is really suitable for people who are looking for a long-term option. And that's particularly people who want to have a family in the private rented sector. And just to give you a few kind of illustrations of what I think doesn't really work for people, short-term tenancies are a problem. The fact that you could be asked to leave when you've done nothing wrong. In other markets or other countries where they have much bigger sways of the market in the private rented sector, unless you stop paying your rent or do anything else egregious, you can't be just thrown out because your landlord wants their house back. So I think that is an issue if you're trying to put your children through school and have the kind of stability that Caroline described she enjoyed when she was a child. We know that the quality is variable. I've no doubt there are some excellent landlords, but there are also some pretty poor quality ones. And if you're trying to look for a long-term home, you just don't want that variability in quality, and you don't want to have to deal with those problems. And then the other thing that I think really is missing for a lot of people is that you can't really make any changes. We have a rented sector that's about no blue tack on the wall, and you can't put your own pictures up. And that, when you ask people why they prefer ownership rather than renting, there are 3 things that they talk about. One is they see it as an investment, and that's something that we're not going to fix necessarily through renting, and we may look at other ways of building assets for people who are in rent. But the 2 other things they talk about are security, so we're coming back again to longer tenures and more secure tenures where you can't be just thrown out, and flexibility, so the ability to actually make some adaptations. And I think that is really the shift that happens for making something from a house into a home, the ability to make it your own, and that's something that our rented sector really doesn't offer. So what are sort of the 3 things I think we need to do in terms of recognising that the private rented sector is changing from being maybe a stopgap kind of tenure for people in their sort of mobile 20s to a long-term home? Well, the first thing is we need to massively expand the private rented sector, and I think that's already been said. We need more homes of all kinds, and we definitely need there to be more rented homes. So we need to get building, and we need to make sure that some of that building is about homes for rent. And so the government's current approach to only really talking about support for first-time buyers just isn't really going to meet the needs of a lot of people in low to middle incomes. And my hope is that as part of the policy review, there will be more focus on renting as a tenure of equal worth alongside ownership. The second, and I suppose I disagree slightly with Richard here, is that I do think we need to try and attract more of the big institutional investment into the private rented sector, and it's an area that we're currently doing a lot of work on. And I think that there are models that we're trying to develop that will entice private money in. We just don't have enough public investment going into housing, and development finance is very thin on the ground right now. So more institutional investment, enticed in perhaps by investment of public land, would do a lot to boost the sector. And then finally, I think we need to change the offer to people. We need a new kind of rented product. And I think that's more professional landlords, and not just individual landlords, but also landlords who kind of do this as their business. Some of those could be housing associations, for example. There's nothing to stop a housing association also being involved in the private rented sector. We need longer leases so that people can know that they can put their children through primary school and be able to stay in the same house, and transparency around those leases so that the rules are clear. If you don't violate the rules, you don't have to leave, and you can anticipate your rents rising at a certain pace in the time that you're in the property. So I think buy-to-let has served us reasonably well in the past, and has brought a huge amount of investment into the sector. But as the nature of the sector changes, I think we need a change in the product that the sector offers to people to provide far more security and stability.
Great, thank you, Vidhya.